It was a bright Tuesday morning when Dr. Emily Carter steered her sleek black Lexus into the private aviation section of Charleston Metropolitan Airport. The spring sun glinted off the car's polished exterior as she smoothly pulled into the VIP parking area. At 46 years old, Dr. Carter had worked tirelessly to secure her position as one of the nation's leading neurosurgeons. Today was particularly significant. A high-profile patient in New Haven required her expertise for a complex brain surgery, and a private jet had been arranged to transport her there. Emily glanced at her watch. It was 8:30 a.m., giving her a comfortable window before her 9 a.m. departure. She adjusted her reflection in the car's mirror one last time. Her deep brown skin radiated confidence, and her neatly styled twists were secured in an elegant chignon. She smoothed the lapel of her navy blazer and ensured her pearl necklace was perfectly centered. Emily believed in presenting herself impeccably, not to prove anything to anyone, but because it was a reflection of her personal standards. As she stepped out of her car, she methodically gathered her belongings. In her right hand, she held a mahogany leather briefcase containing vital medical documents and her laptop. Over her left shoulder, her designer tote carried her passport, flight papers, and personal essentials. The confident rhythm of her heels against the pavement echoed as she made her way to the terminal entrance. The private aviation terminal was a world apart from the bustling main airport. Its sleek, modern design featured expansive glass walls and minimalist architecture. A few high-end vehicles were parked nearby, and scattered travelers, clad in tailored suits and carrying luxury briefcases, conversed quietly. In the distance, a gleaming private jet ascended into the clear sky, a reminder of how routine such moments had become in Dr. Carter's demanding career. As she approached the entrance, her attention was drawn to a security guard stationed at his post. He was a middle-aged white man with streaks of gray in his hair. His crisp blue uniform bore a badge identifying him as Mark Hansen. Emily barely gave him a second thought. Over the years, she had passed through countless security checkpoints without incident, and she expected this one to be no different. She reached into her bag and retrieved her identification and flight documents, ensuring everything was ready before she reached the door. Years of experience had taught her that preparation made everything smoother. Her hand held a stack of credentials: her medical license, passenger clearance, and driver's license, though typically only one or two were required. The morning air was crisp and invigorating. Birds chirped melodiously in the trees lining the lot, and a gentle breeze carried the faint roar of jets from the main terminal. Everything about this day seemed calm, ordinary, a continuation of her busy life as a dedicated doctor. As she moved closer to the entrance, Emily noticed the serene contrast between the private terminal and the main airport. This area was quieter, more exclusive, with only a handful of travelers nearby. She spotted her chartered jet through the glass walls, where the ground crew was making final preparations for takeoff. Her mind briefly wandered to her patient in New Haven as she mentally reviewed the surgical case. The procedure was intricate, but that was why she had been called. Dr. Carter had built a reputation for taking on the most challenging cases, ones others couldn't handle. This marked her third emergency consultation in a month, and she felt prepared for the task. Just before reaching the automatic doors, Emily sent a quick text to her assistant at the hospital, confirming that all her afternoon appointments had been successfully rescheduled. Staying organized and ensuring no detail went overlooked were habits that had earned her the respect and admiration of her peers. The automatic doors to the terminal were now just a few steps away. Dr. Emily Carter rolled her suitcase behind her. Her thoughts already focused on the upcoming flight and the critical case awaiting her in New Haven. She was unaware that her otherwise uneventful morning was about to take a dramatic turn. At the entrance of the private terminal, security guard Mark Hansen observed her approach. His hand shifted to adjust his badge, and his posture stiffened. What unfolded next would not only alter several lives, but ignite a nationwide debate about bias and security in private aviation. As Dr. Carter reached the terminal entrance, Hansen stepped in front of her abruptly. His demeanor shifted from neutral to confrontational in a matter of seconds. He raised his hand in a halting gesture, even though she had already begun slowing down, documents in hand. "Excuse me, ma'am, but you need to head over to the main terminal," Hansen announced loudly, his voice cutting through the quiet lobby. "This is a private aviation area." He didn't even glance at the documents Emily was holding out. Keeping her composure, she replied evenly, "Good morning, sir. I have my documentation right here. I'm scheduled for the 9 a.m. flight to New Haven." She extended her papers toward him, but Hansen stepped back, refusing to touch them. "I've been working here for 15 years, Hansen declared, crossing his arms. "I know who belongs here and who doesn't." His eyes swept over her tailored blazer and designer heels, his expression loaded with doubt. Just then, two businessmen entered the terminal through a different door. Hansen barely glanced in their direction and didn't ask for their papers. Emily noticed this and took a measured breath. She had encountered situations like this before, but they never ceased to sting. "Sir, I understand you're doing your job," she began, maintaining her professional tone. "I am a neurosurgeon traveling to New Haven for an emergency consultation. Here are my credentials, flight details, and ID." Hansen let out a sharp, dismissive laugh, loud enough to draw the attention of others nearby. "Right, and I'm the President of the United States," he retorted sarcastically. "Look, I'm trying to be nice, but you don't belong here. The main terminal is that way." He pointed toward the distant building that housed regular airline passengers. A small crowd began to form, curious onlookers pulling out their phones and murmuring among themselves. Through the glass walls, Emily could see her chartered jet parked on the tarmac, waiting for her. She checked her watch. It was now 8:40 a.m. "Mr. Hansen," she said, reading his name tag with deliberate calm, "I'm asking you one last time. Please review my documentation. My patient in New Haven is waiting for me, and this delay is unnecessary." Despite the rising tension, her voice remained steady, though her pulse quickened. Hansen's face darkened with anger. "Now you're telling me how to do my job," he snapped. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police." He grabbed his radio, making a theatrical display of preparing to call for backup. At that moment, a white couple approached the entrance, their relaxed demeanor a stark contrast to the escalating tension. Without asking for their documents, Hansen greeted them warmly. "Good morning, folks. Have a great flight." The couple glanced uneasily between Hansen and Emily as they hurried past. "So you're letting them through without checking their documents," Emily said, her voice low but pointed, "but you won't even look at mine?" She retrieved her phone and began recording the interaction. "Is there something about me specifically that makes you think I don't belong here?" Hansen's face flushed an even deeper shade of red. "Are you accusing me of something?" He shot back, his voice rising. "That's it. I'm calling security." His hands trembled as he gripped the radio. The growing crowd murmured louder, and more phones were raised to capture the scene. A young woman in the group stepped forward and called out, "This isn't right. She's just trying to show her documents." But Hansen ignored the comment entirely, his focus locked on Emily as the tension continued to mount. Dr. Emily Carter maintained her composure. Years of conducting high-stakes surgeries had prepared her to face intense pressure with poise. Nearby, she noticed an older man in a pilot's uniform observing the commotion with a furrowed brow. Around her, several travelers had their phones out, openly recording the escalating scene. "Mr. Hansen," she addressed the security guard firmly, her voice calm but resolute. "I don't want any trouble. I just need to board my flight. My patient in New Haven is waiting for me to conduct an emergency surgery consultation. Please, just check my documents." "Security is already on the way," Hansen announced loudly, ignoring her request. "And stop with this doctor nonsense. Nobody's buying it." He deliberately moved to block her view of the chartered jet, his posture suggesting he was asserting his authority. What Hansen didn't know was that Dr. Carter had already sent a quick text to her charter company's representative. She also had the number for the airport's security operations center, saved from previous trips. As he continued his power play, she discreetly pressed the call button on her phone, knowing it was better to let the proper authorities intervene. The crowd around them grew larger, with whispers rippling through the terminal. The morning sun streamed through the glass walls, illuminating the scene like a spotlight. It was a tense and surreal moment, one that no one present could have anticipated would soon spiral into something much bigger. As the minutes dragged on, the situation deteriorated further. While Dr. Carter stood quietly holding her documents, more travelers stopped to watch, some recording while others shook their heads at Hansen's behavior. From the growing crowd, a young man in a sharp gray suit stepped forward. "Sir, I've seen Dr. Carter on the news. She's a renowned surgeon," he said, his voice calm but assertive. "Everyone needs to mind their own business." Hansen barked, waving the man off angrily. His face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is a security matter, and I'm handling it." His raised voice echoed across the terminal, startling several people. Just then, another couple approached the entrance, casually dressed but carrying designer golf bags. Hansen's demeanor shifted instantly. He greeted them with a broad smile and moved quickly to hold the door open. "Welcome to the private terminal. Off for a golf trip?" he asked cheerfully. Dr. Carter observed the blatant double standard in silence, her phone still recording the entire interaction. "Mr. Hansen," she said evenly, "in the last 10 minutes, you've allowed 6 people to pass through without checking a single document. I'm the only person you've stopped. Can you explain why?" Hansen spun around, glaring at her. "That's it. You're trespassing and harassing me now," he shouted, fumbling with his radio. "Security, we've got a situation at the private terminal entrance. I need backup immediately." His voice wavered slightly as he spoke, and his hands shook. More people joined the crowd, many with their phones raised, recording the scene from different angles. A flight attendant from another private jet whispered something to her pilot, who immediately pulled out his phone and began making calls. "My flight departs in 15 minutes, Dr. Carter said calmly, though her tone carried a hint of urgency. "There's a patient waiting for me in New Haven who needs life-saving care. Every minute of this delay is putting their health at risk." She raised her medical license higher for emphasis, but Hansen turned his back on her, dismissing her completely. "This is disgraceful." An older woman in the crowd called out loudly, her voice cutting through the noise. "She's shown you every possible document. What more do you want?" Others nodded and voiced their agreement. Hansen's face turned nearly purple with frustration. "All of you are interfering with security protocols," he yelled, his voice trembling with anger. "If you don't clear this area immediately, you'll all be dealing with the police." Dr. Carter checked her phone. The text she had sent to the charter company had been read, and the Security Operations Center was still on the line, quietly listening to the entire ordeal. The tension in the terminal continued to rise, with no resolution yet in sight. Dr. Emily Carter knew help was on the way, but she needed to stay calm just a little longer. Nearby, a teenage girl holding her phone announced, "This is going viral already. Over 1,000 people are watching right now." The words seemed to agitate Mark Hansen further. "You can't record me," he shouted, waving his arms to block the cameras. "This is a restricted area. No filming allowed." But it was already too late. Dozens of phones were trained on him, capturing every word in motion. Through the glass walls of the terminal, Emily spotted her pilot observing the scene. He had his phone pressed to his ear, his expression grave. Even the ground crew had stopped their work, turning their attention to the escalating commotion at the terminal's entrance. "Mr. Hansen?" "Dr. Sa," Carter said one last time, her tone still composed and professional. "I understand that you're upset, but I have every right to be here. I'm asking you again to check my documents and allow me to board my flight." Hansen jabbed a finger in her direction, his voice trembling with anger. "You think you're so clever? You think these people filming you will change anything? I've worked here for 15 years, and I know exactly who belongs here and who doesn't." He barely finished speaking when the automatic doors behind him slid open. Unbeknownst to Hansen, his heated remarks had been heard by the individuals who had just arrived. The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward the newcomers. The head of airport security, the private charter company's representative, and the terminal's general manager. Their serious expressions left no doubt. They had been listening. Hansen remained oblivious, his attention fixed on Emily. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting a dramatic spotlight on the scene. In the sudden hush, even the crackling of Hansen's radio seemed deafening. "Mr. Hansen," The head of airport security, Mrs. Regina Thornton, finally spoke, her voice sharp and authoritative. Hansen spun around, his face draining of color as he registered who was standing before him. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "Step away from Dr. Carter immediately," Mrs. Thornton commanded. She was a tall woman in her 50s, her crisp black suit and security badge radiating authority far beyond Hansen's. The charter company representative, Mr. Daniel Yu, stepped forward, moving quickly to Emily's side. "Dr. Carter, I sincerely apologize for this unacceptable situation," he said. "We've worked with you for years, and this should never have happened." As he spoke, he retrieved a tablet and began pulling up Emily's flight history. The terminal's general manager, Mr. Alan Briggs, addressed Hansen firmly. "Hand over your security badge, Mr. Hansen, right now." The crowd, still filming, watched as Hansen's hands trembled while he unclipped his badge. Emily, though relieved, maintained her composure, presenting herself as calm and professional as ever. She turned to Mrs. Thornton and handed over her papers. "I've been trying to show these to Mr. Hansen for over 20 minutes, she explained. "My credentials and documentation are all in order." Mrs. Thornton reviewed the papers swiftly and announced to the room, "Everything is in perfect order, just as we would expect from one of our long-standing charter passengers." She turned back to Hansen, whose face glistened with sweat. "Would you like to explain why you refused to even look at these documents?" I was just following protocols," Hansen stammered. "You see, I thought—" His voice faltered and he trailed off, the weight of his weak excuses evident to everyone. The teenage girl holding her phone broke the silence. "It's over 10,000 viewers now," she said, her voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. The crowd murmured, their phones still pointed at Hansen, capturing every moment of the unraveling situation. The teenage girl's comment about viewers' growing outrage made Mark Hansen's shoulders sag even further. Meanwhile, Mr. Alan Briggs, the terminal manager, was reviewing footage on his tablet. His expression grew grimmer as he spoke. In the last hour alone, Hansen allowed 23 passengers through without checking a single document. Dr. Carter was the only one stopped. His voice was heavy with disapproval. Mrs. Regina Thornton, head of airport security, turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Charleston Metropolitan Airport, I deeply apologize for this incident. This behavior does not reflect our values." She then shifted her attention to Dr. Carter. "Doctor, we'll have you on your way to New Haven immediately." As 2 security officers arrived to escort Hansen away, he kept glancing back at the crowd, his expression a mix of disbelief and humiliation. The onlookers parted to let him through, their phones still recording every moment of his swift downfall. Nearby, Mr. Daniel Yu, the charter company's representative, was already on his phone. "I've instructed the pilot to begin engine preparations," he informed Dr. Carter. "We'll have you in the air within 10 minutes. He gestured to a VIP escort who arrived to assist with her luggage. The businessman who had defended Dr. Carter earlier approached her once again. "Dr. Carter," he said warmly, "you saved my wife's life last year. I recorded everything today. Would you like a copy for your lawyers?" Emily offered a polite smile and nodded her thanks but turned to Mrs. Thornton instead. "I don't want anyone to lose their job," she said softly, "but I do want to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Mrs. Thornton's face hardened with determination. "Don't worry, Doctor. This incident makes it clear we need immediate changes to our security procedures. They can't wait any longer." As the crowd began to disperse, several individuals came forward to offer Dr. Carter their support. One flight attendant who had witnessed the confrontation handed her a business card. "I've seen situations like this before, but was too afraid to speak up," she admitted. "If you need a statement for the investigation, I'm happy to help." Within moments, a golf cart arrived to transport Dr. Carter to her jet. As she settled into the seat, she glanced back and caught sight of Hansen sitting in the security office, his head buried in his hands. The morning sun was now high in the sky, and though her flight had been delayed, it was finally ready to depart. As the cart moved across the tarmac, Emily noticed news vans pulling up outside the terminal. The videos of the incident were already going viral, and this was just the beginning of a much larger story. Once aboard the private jet, Dr. Carter sank into the plush leather seat, taking her first deep breath since the ordeal began. The flight attendant, a young woman named Julia, brought her a cup of steaming tea. "Dr. Carter, I just checked my phone. Your story is trending on Twitter and Facebook. People are calling you a hero for staying so calm." Julia showed her the screen where the video had already surpassed 1 million views. Back at the airport, chaos continued to unfold. News vans from major outlets including WNN, National Eye, and Global Herald had stationed themselves outside the private terminal. Reporters in brightly colored suits held microphones, delivering live updates on the incident. Their camera lights were almost unnecessary under the glaring midday sun. Inside the terminal's security office, Hansen sat in a small, stark room with Mrs. Thornton and 2 other senior officials. His pale face was a stark contrast to his earlier anger. The security footage played on a monitor behind him, clearly showing him letting multiple passengers through without checks, while deliberately blocking Dr. Carter. "In the past hour alone," Mrs. Thornton said, reading from her report, "you failed to check documentation for 23 passengers. Dr. Carter was the only person you stopped." She paused, her tone icy as she addressed Hansen. "Explain yourself." Mark Hansen, seated across the table, stared down at his trembling hands. "I was just trying to maintain security," he mumbled weakly, though his own voice betrayed his lack of conviction. Behind him, the security footage played on a large screen, providing indisputable evidence of his actions. Meanwhile, in the main terminal office, Mr. Alan Briggs, the terminal manager, was inundated with phone calls. The airport social media team reported an overwhelming response. Thousands of people were sharing their own stories of discrimination at airports. Major news outlets were requesting official statements, and civil rights organizations were reaching out to offer support. Dr. Emily Carter's phone buzzed relentlessly with messages of encouragement, though she had switched it to silent mode. She needed to focus on reviewing her patient's medical files during the flight to New Haven. Even so, a message from her sister caught her eye. "You handled that like a queen. Mom and Dad would be so proud." Back at the charter company's headquarters, Mr. Daniel Yu had called an emergency meeting with his staff. "From today, we're overhauling our protocols," he announced. "Every VIP passenger will receive a digital ID card with their photo. There will be no room for discrimination based on appearance." The teenage girl who live-streamed the incident, Mia Santiago, was being interviewed by a local news station. "I just felt like I had to record it," she explained. "Dr. Carter was so professional, and the guard was clearly in the wrong. People need to see that this still happens." In the executive offices of Charleston Metropolitan Airport, the management team gathered for a crisis meeting. The airport CEO, Mr. Before, Richard McAllister, joined via video call. His face was grim on the large conference screen. "This isn't just about one security guard," he stated firmly. "We need to revamp our entire training program." Mrs. Thornton presented a thick stack of reports. "Over the past year, 12 similar complaints were filed against Mr. Hansen," she revealed, her tone steely. "Most were ignored or dismissed. All involved minorities being stopped without justification." Meanwhile, in the terminal, passengers had gathered around TV screens broadcasting news reports about the incident. The videos, captured from multiple angles, showed Dr. Carter's calm, dignified demeanor in contrast to Hansen's escalating aggression. Up in the air, Dr. Carter's pilot made an announcement. "We're making excellent time to New Haven. We should land about 20 minutes ahead of schedule, making up for the earlier delay." Emily smiled, relieved that her patient would still receive the care they needed on time. The flight attendant, Julia, approached her seat with a laptop. "The Wi-Fi is ready if you need it, Dr. Carter," she said, then hesitated. "My daughter is in medical school, and she looks up to doctors like you. Thank you for showing her how to handle these situations with dignity." As the plane cruised at 30,000 feet, the story continued to unfold below. News networks aired special segments on discrimination in private aviation, while hashtags like #dignity in flight and Justice for Carter trended across social media. Civil rights lawyers were calling the airport, signaling that this was no longer an isolated incident, but a catalyst for change. Still, Dr. Carter stayed focused on her top priority, her patient. Opening her medical files, she pushed thoughts of the viral story aside. Right now, she had a life to save. The following morning at 9 a.m., exactly 24 hours after the confrontation, Charleston Metropolitan Airport held a press conference in their main meeting room. Reporters packed the space as CEO Richard McAllister stood at the podium. Behind him sat Mrs. Thornton, Mr. Briggs, and several other senior officials. The room hummed with tension as cameras rolled, capturing what would be the first of many steps toward reform. Mr. Allen Briggs and several board members sat somberly at the press conference, where large TV screens displayed clips from the previous day's incident. The videos, now viewed over 50 million times across various social media platforms, were impossible to ignore. The airport CEO, Richard McAllister, stood at the podium, his face grave. "I want to publicly apologize to Dr. Emily Carter," McAllister began, speaking directly into the cameras. "What happened yesterday was completely unacceptable. Today, we are announcing immediate changes to our security procedures." Meanwhile, in New Haven, Dr. Carter was leaving the hospital after successfully completing her patient's emergency surgery consultation. As she walked out, staff members stopped to shake her hand, many of them mentioning the viral videos. Some even asked to take selfies with her. "Dr. Carter," a young black medical student called out, her voice trembling. "Thank you for showing us how to stand up for ourselves with dignity." The student's eyes brimmed with tears. "I've been scared to apply for private hospital positions, but you've given me courage." Back in Charleston, Mark Hansen's troubling work history was becoming public. Local news stations reported that 5 of his former colleagues had come forward with allegations of discriminatory behavior. Each described how their complaints were ignored or dismissed by previous management. Mrs. Regina Thornton, sitting at her desk, sifted through hundreds of emails, flooding her inbox. Many were inquiries from airports across the country, asking about Charleston's plans to implement new security training programs. "We can't sweep this under the rug anymore," she told her team. "It's time for real change." In the terminal where the confrontation had occurred, visible upgrades were already underway. Workers were installing new security cameras and overhauling the check-in system. Clear signage, explaining passenger rights and proper security procedures, was being placed throughout the terminal. Additionally, every security guard was now equipped with a body camera to ensure accountability. The teenage girl who recorded the viral video, Mia Santiago, had become an overnight sensation. Morning talk shows were clamoring to interview her. "I just did what felt right," she told one reporter. "When you see something wrong, you can't stay quiet anymore." Dr. Carter's phone buzzed endlessly with interview requests from major news networks. Her assistant had to create a dedicated email account just to manage the flood of messages. However, Emily declined most offers, agreeing only to speak with a medical journal about discrimination in healthcare and aviation. At the airport, all security staff attended a mandatory emergency training session led by a diversity expert. The instructor played the video of Hansen and Dr. Carter for the group. "This is what discrimination looks like," she said. "And this is why we must change." On social media, the story continued to dominate conversations. Hashtags like #Justice for Carter and aviation equality trended worldwide. Celebrities and politicians shared the video, calling for systemic reform in airport security practices across the nation. Mark Hansen, now officially terminated, faced mounting consequences. The airport's investigation revealed a troubling pattern of discriminatory incidents in his past. Hansen attempted to defend himself in an interview, claiming, "I was just doing my job," but the video evidence left no room for doubt, and his excuses only deepened public outrage. The charter company where Dr. Carter was a longtime client made significant changes as well. They announced a new VIP passenger app, complete with photos and pre-approved security clearance. "Our priority is ensuring that all our passengers feel safe and respected," stated Daniel Yu in a press release. Later that afternoon, Charleston Metropolitan Airport's board of directors held an emergency meeting. They approved a $1 million budget for new training initiatives and upgraded security equipment. "This incident opened our eyes," one board member told reporters. "We can't let this happen ever again." By evening, other airports were reaching out to Charleston for guidance, seeking advice on how to improve their own security protocols. The ripple effects of Dr. Carter's ordeal were already leading to widespread changes, promising a brighter and more equitable future for travelers everywhere. Mrs. Regina Thornton spent hours on conference calls, sharing Charleston Metropolitan Airport's updated plans and discussing strategies to prevent future incidents of discrimination. As the sun set on this eventful day, Dr. Emily Carter finally returned to her hotel room in New Haven. She flipped on the TV and saw her face on nearly every news channel. However, instead of watching, she turned her attention back to her medical files. Tomorrow, more patients awaited her care, and that remained her top priority. What had started as one woman standing her ground with grace and dignity had grown into a national conversation about discrimination in aviation, healthcare, and beyond. 7 days after the incident at Charleston Metropolitan Airport, Dr. Carter sat in her office, a stack of letters neatly arranged on her desk. Hundreds of people from across the country had written to share their stories and thank her for her courage. Her assistant, Olivia, knocked softly on the door. "Dr. Carter, CNN is here for your first official interview," Olivia announced. Emily had waited an entire week before speaking publicly, wanting to ensure her message would inspire meaningful change. The CNN reporter, Sophia Ramirez, set up her camera in front of a wall displaying Emily's numerous medical degrees and awards. "Your video has now been viewed over 100 million times," Sophia began. "How does it feel to have become a symbol for standing up against discrimination?" Emily paused thoughtfully before replying. "This isn't about me," she said with calm resolve. "It's about fixing a system that impacts thousands of people every day." She picked up a handful of letters from her desk. "These stories prove that what happened to me isn't unique." At Charleston Metropolitan Airport, sweeping changes were underway. Every security guard now wore a body camera with a clearly visible ID number. New multilingual signs informed passengers of their rights. Most significantly, 2 security officers now worked together at every checkpoint to ensure fair treatment. The airport's revamped training program had become a national model. Mrs. Ed Thornton spent her days hosting officials from airports nationwide who sought to learn from Charleston's reforms. "Dr. Carter's experience forced us to confront issues we'd long ignored," she told visitors. "Now we're addressing them head-on." Meanwhile, Mark Hansen's story took a drastically different turn. After losing his job, he agreed to appear on a special TV program about bias in security. "I was wrong," he admitted, his face lined with regret. "Watching those videos of myself, I didn't like the person I saw." The teenage girl who had recorded the viral video, Mia Santiago, had started a social media movement called Record for Justice. "People need to safely document discrimination when they see it," she explained in interviews. Major civil rights organizations reached out to partner with her initiative. Back in her office, Dr. Carter continued her interview. "What advice would you give to other professionals facing similar discrimination?" Sophia asked, her camera zooming in on Emily's thoughtful expression. "Stay professional, know your rights, and document everything," Emily replied firmly. "But most importantly, never let anyone make you doubt your worth or your right to be somewhere." The charter company Emily worked with also made lasting changes. They introduced a new system where all VIP passengers received digital ID cards with their photos and credentials. Since implementing these changes, bookings from minority executives have risen by 50% in just 1 week, Daniel Yu announced proudly. Dr. Carter's hospital also noticed positive ripple effects. More minority students were applying for residency programs inspired by her example. "Dr. Carter showed us that we belong in these spaces," one applicant wrote. The hospital board seized the momentum, launching new diversity initiatives in their hiring practices. On social media, stories of courage and resilience continued to flood in. The hashtag #CarterStrong became a rallying cry for people sharing their experiences of standing up against unfair treatment. Emily's calm professionalism had inspired countless others to document and report discrimination, proving that change often begins with one person's bravery. Mrs. Regina Thornton spent hours on conference calls, sharing Charleston Metropolitan Airport's updated plans and discussing strategies to prevent future incidents of discrimination. As the sun set on this eventful day, Dr. Emily Carter finally returned to her hotel room in New Haven. She flipped on the TV and saw her face on nearly every news channel. However, instead of watching, she turned her attention back to her medical files. Tomorrow, more patients awaited her care, and that remained her top priority. What had started as one woman standing her ground with grace and dignity had grown into a national conversation about discrimination in aviation, healthcare, and beyond. 7 days after the incident at Charleston Metropolitan Airport, Dr. Carter sat in her office, a stack of letters neatly arranged on her desk. Hundreds of people from across the country had written to share their stories and thank her for her courage. Her assistant, Olivia, knocked softly on the door. "Dr. Carter, CNN is here for your first official interview," Olivia announced. Emily had waited an entire week before speaking publicly, wanting to ensure her message would inspire meaningful change. The CNN reporter, Sofia Ramirez, set up her camera in front of a wall displaying Emily's numerous medical degrees and awards. "Your video has now been viewed over 100 million times," Sofia began. "How does it feel to have become a symbol for standing up against discrimination?" Emily paused thoughtfully before replying. "This isn't about me," she said with calm resolve. "It's about fixing a system that impacts thousands of people every day." She picked up a handful of letters from her desk. "These stories prove that what happened to me isn't unique." At Charleston Metropolitan Airport, sweeping changes were underway. Every security guard now wore a body camera with a clearly visible ID number. New multilingual signs informed passengers of their rights. Most significantly, 2 security officers now worked together at every checkpoint to ensure fair treatment. The airport's revamped training program had become a national model. Mrs. Thornton spent her days hosting officials from airports nationwide who sought to learn from Charleston's reforms. "Dr. Carter's experience forced us to confront issues we'd long ignored," she told visitors. "Now, we're addressing them head-on." Meanwhile, Mark Hansen's story took a drastically different turn. After losing his job, he agreed to appear on a special TV program about bias and security. "I was wrong," he admitted, his face lined with regret. "Watching those videos of myself, I didn't like the person I saw." The teenage girl who had recorded the viral video, Mia Santiago, had started a social media movement called Record for Justice. "People need to safely document discrimination when they see it," she explained in interviews. Major civil rights organizations reached out to partner with her initiative. Back in her office, Dr. Carter continued her interview. "What advice would you give to other professionals facing similar discrimination?" Sofia asked, her camera zooming in on Emily's thoughtful expression. "Stay professional, know your rights, and document everything," Emily replied firmly. "But most importantly, never let anyone make you doubt your worth or your right to be somewhere." The charter company Emily worked with also made lasting changes. They introduced a new system where all VIP passengers received digital ID cards with their photos and credentials. Since implementing these changes, bookings from minority executives have risen by 50% in just 1 week, Daniel Yu announced proudly. Dr. Carter's hospital also noticed positive ripple effects. More minority students were applying for residency programs, inspired by her example. "Dr. Carter showed us that we belong in these spaces," one applicant wrote. The hospital board seized the momentum, launching new diversity initiatives in their hiring practices. On social media, stories of courage and resilience continued to flood in. The hashtag #CarterStrong became a rallying cry for people sharing their experiences of standing up against unfair treatment. Emily's calm professionalism had inspired countless others to document and report discrimination, proving that change often begins with one person's bravery. The airport security office at Charleston Metropolitan Airport had undergone a complete transformation. Posters promoting equality and outlining proper security procedures now adorned the walls. Security staff attended daily briefings to discuss fair treatment, and Mrs. Regina Thornton ensured that every complaint was thoroughly investigated and taken seriously. Local schools began inviting Dr. Emily Carter to speak to students. Her message was always the same: success is the best response to discrimination. Focus on your goals, and don't let anyone stop you from achieving them. Mark Hansen's former colleagues were also undergoing intensive training. During one session, several admitted they had witnessed his discriminatory behavior in the past, but had remained silent. "We can't afford to stay quiet anymore," one guard confessed. "Silence makes us complicit." That evening, Dr. Carter finished reading yet another stack of letters from people inspired by her story. One, in particular, stood out. It was from a young black girl who dreamed of becoming a doctor. "You've shown me that we can be strong and professional, even when people try to hold us back," the girl wrote. As the sun set outside her office window, Emily began penning a heartfelt reply. She knew the changes happening now would create a better future for the next generation. What had started as an ordinary, frustrating morning had become the catalyst for a powerful movement of change. 3 months after the incident, Dr. Emily Carter stood on stage at a National Aviation Security Conference in Washington, D.C. The large hall was packed with airport managers, security chiefs, and civil rights leaders from across the country. All had gathered to learn about the reforms that had come to be known as the Carter Standards. Standing beside her at the podium was Mrs. Thornton. Together, they presented the revamped security training program that had revolutionized aviation security nationwide. On the large screen behind them, compelling statistics were displayed. Complaints of discrimination had dropped by 80% at airports that had implemented the Carter Standards. "The day Dr. Carter changed everything," Mrs. Thornton told the audience, "began as an unfortunate event, but it has evolved into a nationwide revolution in how we ensure fairness and respect in airport security." She gestured toward the security guards in attendance, each wearing the newly designed uniforms and equipped with body cameras. Mark Hansen, the former security guard at the center of the incident, was also present, but in a vastly different role. He now worked for an anti-bias training organization, using his own story as a cautionary tale. "I was the perfect example of what not to do," he admitted to a group of officers. "My biases could have ruined someone's life. I've learned, and I'm here to help others learn too." Back at Charleston Metropolitan Airport, the private terminal looked unrecognizable. 2 security guards of diverse backgrounds were stationed at every checkpoint, ensuring no single perspective dominated the process. Digital scanners were used to verify passenger IDs, eliminating room for subjective bias. Signs in multiple languages now outlined every passenger's rights. Mia Santiago, the teenage girl who had recorded the viral video, had become a renowned activist. Her organization, Record for Justice, now had chapters in 50 cities. "Dr. Carter taught us that calmly and professionally documenting discrimination can lead to real change," she said during a recent interview. Dr. Carter's medical practice had grown significantly as well. More minority patients sought her out, comforted by her commitment to equality and professionalism. Her waiting room walls displayed framed news articles about the airport incident, reminding everyone that standing up for fairness was possible. The charter company, Dr. Carter had worked with saw remarkable success from their reforms. Their new digital ID system became an industry standard, and bookings from minority clients tripled. "Dr. Carter showed us where we needed to improve," said Daniel Yu, "and when we did, we saw incredible results." Through her calm persistence, Dr. Emily Carter had not only reshaped airport security, but also inspired a cultural shift, proving that one person's courage and professionalism could drive systemic change. "And when we did, our business actually improved," Daniel Yu concluded at the National Aviation Security Conference, referring to the transformative changes made by his charter flight company. At the same event, Dr. Emily Carter received an award for her outstanding contributions to aviation safety and equality. But instead of focusing on herself during her acceptance speech, she invited 50 others to join her on stage, individuals who had experienced similar discrimination and worked to create meaningful change. "This isn't about one incident or one person," Dr. Carter told the audience. "It's about ensuring that everyone is treated with dignity and respect." The audience rose to their feet in a heartfelt standing ovation. Many wiped tears from their eyes, moved by her humility and the significance of her message. Media coverage had shifted dramatically. Instead of focusing solely on stories of discrimination, news outlets now celebrated positive changes in aviation security. Security guards who handled situations with fairness and professionalism were praised publicly, and examples of good behavior became the new viral trend. The old security office at Charleston Metropolitan Airport had been completely transformed. New employees watched the original footage of Mark Hansen's interaction with Dr. Carter during their training sessions. The video was used to teach how bias could cloud judgment and the importance of treating every passenger equally. The sessions always ended with a live video call from Hansen himself, who shared how he had learned from his mistakes. Dr. Carter's calm and dignified response had become a model for addressing difficult situations. Beyond airports, the video was incorporated into training programs for police academies, hospitals, and schools. It was hailed as a valuable tool for teaching professionalism and bias management. The young black girl who had written to Dr. Carter months earlier was now a regular visitor at her hospital. Inspired by Emily's story, she had decided to pursue her dream of becoming a doctor. Dr. Carter mentored her and several other minority students, encouraging them to break barriers in medicine. "Success is the best answer to discrimination," Emily often told them. "But helping others succeed is even better." As the conference drew to a close, Dr. Carter stood at the podium one final time. The room was filled with security chiefs, policymakers, and aviation leaders from across the globe, including Europe and Asia, who had come to learn about the groundbreaking Carter standards. "What happened to me 3 months ago," she began, her voice steady but emotional, "started with something as simple as trying to board a flight. Today, it has sparked a global conversation about respect and equality. Remember, every person who passes through your security checkpoint deserves respect. Their dignity is in your hands." The audience erupted into applause, standing once again to honor her words and her work. As Dr. Carter stepped off the stage, the evening sun illuminated the Washington Monument outside. Inside, people from around the world were inspired by the profound lesson that one person's dignity, professionalism, and determination could ignite transformative change. The Carter standards were no longer just a set of rules. They had become the gold standard for the future of aviation security.